Way to save the season to throw. Fire down! Incomplete down at the goal line by San Diego. Tomlinson off the left side. Tomlinson sidestep. Hello, history books. I think they have to now. Here's Sproles. Sproles inside the 10, inside the 5, and the Chargers win the game.
What's up, good people, and welcome to our first off-season podcast for Lightning Round Podcast. Craig, Jamie, Garrett here. Today, it's internal free agents. So today, we're going to be covering all the exclusive rights free agents, the restricted free agents, the unrestricted free agents, who we think the Chargers should keep or not keep. We're going to go through the entire list. But before we do all that, there's some news that happened, and Jamie did an in-depth I almost said interview, in-depth podcast about the cap breakdown and how it's a pretty easy fix to get them under the cap. Jamie, if you want to give us a little refresher before we get into this, because if we, playing GM here, Joe Horowitz here for this podcast, we'd have to have some money to play with in order to sign these guys. So Jamie can talk us through that. And then also, while we were gone, a little contract switch up for Corey Linsley. So Jamie, why don't you go ahead and fill us in here and how we can get under and start this podcast off?
Yeah. So like I talked about in my podcast last week covering the cap, the Chargers, we were expecting a salary cap of $242 million last week. This week reports are coming out that it's going to be more like $250. So I tweaked the numbers a little bit. With a cap of $250 million, the Chargers are carrying over about $7.5 or $7.7 million from last year. After you account for their existing contracts, they do not currently have 51 players under contract for next year. So you have to add 2 minimum salaries to their cap number. Overall, once you add in everything, the Chargers cap right now they are at a negative $47,300,000, give or take, with the salary cap this year. So they are $47 million and change above the salary cap at the moment. However, as Garrett alluded to, they announced a pay cut for Corey Linsley, not a restructure. I want to make sure we're clear on this point. There were reports yesterday that they restructured Corey Linsley. That is, in fact, not what happened. A restructure, you take existing money and you move it over the remaining years of the contract to create some cap space. That did not happen here. That's usually done by taking base salary and converting it into signing bonus. What happened here with Corey Linsley is the Chargers and Linsley agreed to a $10.29 million pay cut. Literally just removed almost $10,300,000 from Corey Linsley's base salary for 2024. So his new cap number is drastically different. He was at $11.5 million in base salary and $2.6 million in bonus money, prorated bonus money prior to that change, putting him at $14.1 million. Now his cap number is $1,210,000 plus the $2.6 million signing bonus that's left for this year. So we're talking $3.9 million, give or take, and change in an adjusted cap number for Corey Linsley. So with that, the $10.29 million savings that they realized on Linsley's contract, the Chargers are now at $37 million and change above the salary cap. Big savings. They also gave themselves kind of the flexibility. Almost, it sounds like they're going to keep him on the roster this year and probably next by putting him on the retired list come June 1st. And when they do that, they will be able to basically treat him as if he was a post June 1 cut without having to wait until post June 1 to do it, which means they only eat his prorated salary cap for 2024 and they'll eat what's left of it next year as if he had played next year. So it sounds like they're going to do him a solid and keep him on the roster, and he did them a solid by taking a $10 million pay cut, which I'm sure the team appreciates.
Mm-hmm.
So everybody helping each other out, and the Chargers are now $37 million over the cap. And with the moves that I proposed last week, they would be at, assuming they make all these moves, and for the purposes of the show today, we are assuming they're going to make all these moves.
Yep.
Just
and
pull
if
this number.
Yep, you pull it up, and if you haven't listened, Jamie's got the podcast up. He did it last week, so make sure you listen to that one. Go watch it. He explains all this in detail with graphics, by the way.
So yes, I did visual aids because I didn't want to put anybody to sleep. Talking numbers for an hour, and I'm sure people appreciated that. So I created just under $116 million in cap space with the moves that I made. That was trading Khalil Mack, extending Derwin, cutting Eric Kendricks, cutting Mike Williams, cutting Morgan Fox, and restructuring Derwin James and Justin Herbert. I created just under $116 million in salary cap space. And with them being $37 million in change over the cap after the Lindsey move, that would create just a little over $68 million in cap space for the Chargers to play with heading into the offseason.
So to recap, you restructured Derwin and Herbert. You cut Fox, Kendricks.
Yeah, so let me just run through the basic numbers. We won't go too much into detail here, but what I did was I cut Mike Williams.
You cut it in?
I cut it in.
The remix.
I cut Mike Williams, which is a cap savings of $20 million. I cut Eric Kendricks, which is a cap savings of $6.5 million. And I cut Morgan Fox, which is a cap savings of $3.5 million. That created an additional $30 million in space.
Mm-hmm.
So if we assume they're currently $37 million over the cap, that means after those moves, they would be $7 million over the cap. I then extended Keenan Allen, excuse me.
Oh, okay.
I'm having all kinds of problems.
That's all right.
Extended Keenan Allen for a total savings this year of $21.6 million, which would put them at just under $14.5 million below the cap after making that move. Traded Khalil Mack, which saves them $23,250,000. So that's almost $38 million in cap space. And then I restructured Derwin James for a saving of $6.2 million. And I restructured Justin Herbert for a savings of $24.4 million, creating another $30.5 million in cap space. So for a total of $68,337,961 in actual spending cap space. This includes the Chargers draft class for this year. It also includes some money for in-season spending.
So I didn't hear. Did you leave Bosa alone?
I left Bosa alone.
Okay.
After I looked at the numbers, I went in basically assuming they were going to cut him. Had it all set up to cut him, and when I looked at the numbers, it just looked to me like it just wasn't doable to cut him this year. Just too expensive. Next year is probably more likely, so I think they ride it out with Bosa this year, and most likely trade Mack.
I think also from a numbers perspective, it's pretty weird because if you look at based on production between Mack and Bosa, the clear cut would be Bosa. But unfortunately, when you look at the numbers, it makes more sense for Mack to go. But it's just kind of that can't really find a happy medium there because you get the younger prospect in Bosa, but the availability is in question. You can keep Mack. It's going to cost, but you also get the production on top of it and the availability. So you're kind of stuck in between a rock and a hard place once you start actually looking into the physical numbers.
Yeah, and they could, in theory, extend Bosa. I've seen some people suggest that. I personally don't think that makes much sense because he's never healthy. He's already very highly paid, and while it could save you money, you just wind up kicking the can down the road and putting yourself in a spot where you're stuck with him next year too, potentially. And I think it's unlikely they trade him. I've seen some reporters saying that they could trade him for a first-round pick. I don't personally believe that's possible. We know the Ravens were interested in him for a fourth-round pick during the season. Then he got hurt. So I don't know what his trade value looks like. I think trading him is unlikely. I think extending him is unlikely. And because he's only got 1 year left on his contract after this year, there's really no benefit to restructuring him again, because you're just pushing money further down the road and it just becomes more difficult. So I think they keep him as is. Maybe they approach him about a pay cut like they did with Lindsley. I don't see why he would take that after being restructured last year. It's a possibility they could broach that subject, but just based on the hard numbers, based on the way everything shakes out, it just seems like it makes more sense to trade Mac or cut him if you can't find a trade partner and hang on to Bosa.
So did you propose a team by chance, just out of curiosity, with Khalil Mack trade?
No, I didn't get that far into it. It was just strictly numbers.
There was somebody projected or made up a trade of him going to Detroit, which I like a lot, as like a team that's just there in their Super Bowl era, taking a shot on a high-end pass rusher for 1 year to hope they can push it to the Super Bowl. I kind of like that idea.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard the Raiders are interested. I've heard the Ravens are interested.
Why would the Raiders do it? I don't know.
Probably to atone for a previous mistake.
Gillespie will come get your boy.
Yeah, really. I don't know. You would assume that there are a lot of teams who consider themselves contenders who would think that he would be the kind of the final piece of their defense. So
yeah,
you would think they would be able to find a trade partner for him. It's not really the same thing as trying to trade a guy like Hopkins. DeAndre Hopkins. Having a tough time with names tonight. It's not. I don't think it's going to be the same situation as DeAndre Hopkins was last year, where the Cardinals couldn't trade him. I do think somebody's going to have an interest in Mac because he's so productive. Somebody's going to see him as the final piece, I'm sure. So it seems likely that they'll be able to trade him.
Yeah,
the Lions definitely need that secondary rusher for sure, and the Ravens kind of like doing the mercenary thing for those secondary edges as well. So both make a lot of sense.
All right, well, let's move on to these internal free agents. So we're going to go over the exclusive rights free agents first. We'll go to restricted free agents and then hit on unrestricted free agents. And we'll each go through and whether we think they should keep them, what we would do, what the contracts might look like if they do keep them. So let's start with unrestricted free agents. And I'm sure some people might have questions. So
these are exclusive rights free agents.
Excuse me. Yeah. Thank you. Exclusive rights free agents. It's right in front of my face and I missed it anyway. So these 1, 2, 3, 5 players are under team control. The Chargers have the opportunity to offer these players a deal, which is a 1-year deal, which is the league minimum. This, we've talked about it on every other podcast. This is playing with house money. This is practically free. The only downside is if the player is so bad, you don't even want it on your 90. But really, every team pretty much keeps almost all of their exclusive free agents exclusive rights free agents, because it's minimal money. It's only for 1 year. You can cut them in camp if it doesn't work out, and it does not cost you. So, of these players, anybody have any objections to keeping any of these 5?
It's free money, but Marcia Sorrell could kick rocks. I really could care less.
Oh, boo.
Could care less, man. Zach Bailey is, I like what I saw from Zach Bailey being able to move around, that versatility there. Keelan Doss. What am I talking about? Can we end that project? Is it like time for that to just be over and done with? Feels like they've kept him around. He always looks good in training camp, but then nothing ever comes of it. When he steps on the field, you hardly hear anything about it. Just feels like one of those bigger body receivers that just isn't really rounding into form. But, if I had to pick a couple of names out of our list here, would be Foster and Keelan for sure. It feels disrespectful to only pay Dicker what you'd be paying him, but let's see it for another year. And then if you want to give him a bigger contract after that, then so be it. Raheem Lane, definitely somebody I want on the squad. Someone who can continue to further develop with the team. He showed a lot, whether it was on the field during special teams or some of the snaps that he saw, whether it was in preseason or beyond. And I mean, other than that, if you want to keep all of them, I won't make a fuss about it.
Yeah, I mean, Dicker obviously stays. He's one guy who I could possibly see a 2 or 3 year extension for, just to make sure he's here and then I'll have to deal with it later. You're talking about somewhere in the neighborhood of 850,000 to 900,000 per player to keep these guys. It is generally a foregone conclusion. It's basically procedural that these guys get kept. Like Garrett said, house money. The only thing I would add, though, is that it's a whole new regime, and the procedures are going to change, and the coaches and front office have no ties to any of these guys aside from Dicker.
Yeah.
So I would say Doss is probably gone. I would love for Lane to stay. He's the one guy on this list that I think really should and needs to stay, especially looking at the safety room. Possibly losing Gilman. Marlowe's a free agent. There's just not a lot of depth or anybody you can rely on in that room. And Lane, I think, showed himself to be versatile enough to play some free safety, some strong safety. He has some special teams value. He can tackle, he can cover, he can run a little bit. He seems like he'd fit in Minter's defense and seems like the kind of, back end depth piece that Harbaugh would probably really like. So I would keep him. Foster Sarrell, he could stay, he could go. I think they need to bring in, some competition at the very least at right tackle, whether that means competition for Pickens or competition for Sarrell. They need to find some competition somewhere. Bailey is a guy who I would probably keep, like Craig. I thought he showed himself pretty well in the preseason and can play some tackle, can play some guard, could be, kind of a sixth offensive lineman in those jumbo sets that Greg Roman likes to run. So if you're going to keep anybody, it'd be Dicker, Lane, and Bailey, in my opinion. I would probably lean just towards keeping Dicker and Lane. I think the rest can kind of go, maybe Bailey.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. Cameron Dicker deserves an extension. He deserves a new deal. This kicking him around for one more year for the minimum, it feels like a guy with how impressive he's been. You got to keep him around long term. So I would assume that they're going to get a contract done with Dicker and he gets a new deal. Doss, I mean, it's wide receiver depth. For me, if this, like Jamie mentioned, this would be procedural for me. I would keep all 5 of these just to fill in spots until I found somebody better, because cutting them would not matter. Keelan Doss with some wide receiver depth. I could take it or leave it at that point. Raheem Lame is obviously a guy you got to keep. He flashed a lot in last couple camps. Foster Sarrell, it has tackle experience. He was a spot starter. It's just basically O-line depth and camp. Hope somebody can push Foster Sarrell out for somebody you can get this offseason, whether it's in the draft or in free agency. Zach Bailey, he's got enough O-line versatility that I think it's worth keeping him here as some, again, or O-line camp depth.
Of this list, Raheem Lane is the name that could wind up being a significant contributor to the defense next year. You could be that kind of diamond in the rough. Think about like the Geno Stone pick with the Ravens. Technically, the Chargers already have that type of player here on the roster. So there's an opportunity here for him to really build himself on the team and really earn a longer term deal. But of the names, he's the one outside of Cameron Dicker, of course, that makes the most sense and that they absolutely need to hold on to. And again, I think he's going to be a name that everyone's going to need to pay attention to this year.
You're looking at a lot of turnover in terms of people in the secondary and probably on special teams. So having somebody who's been around for a little while, even though it's going to be a new scheme, who's shown he can produce on special teams, I think that's a valuable piece to have.
Yeah, for sure. All right, let's move on to restricted free agents. And it's a short list. It's only 2 guys. But just so you guys have the numbers here, teams can apply the first round tender, the second round tender, and then the rights of first refusal tender. For the first round tender this year, it's $6.46 million. The second round tender is $4.63 million, and then the right of first refusal is $2.82 million. And the right of first refusal is basically the Chargers can match any other offer another team makes. They can either match it or, let the player go. It's basically applied so you can check a player's market value. But when you look at these two names, if you applied any of these tenders to these guys, would you guys apply a first round, second round, or a right of first refusal tender to either of these guys?
I would not.
Me neither.
I feel like the linebacker.
I got that
Barton,
name wrong. Yeah, it's
Blake Lynch. Blake
right? Lynch. Yeah, sorry,
Blake
I
Lynch,
did this.
yeah.
I did this thing right as we got on.
Okay,
I messed that up. My bad.
I thought that looked wrong.
It is,
okay,
because that's an offensive lineman.
I would do with these guys what the Chargers did with Parham last offseason, and that is I would not tender either one of them. I would have standing offers on the table for like a 2-year, $2.5 to $3 million contract for both of them. And whoever takes it first gets it, and you move on. You don't need two of these guys. They're kind of redundant. I have no idea how they view either one of these guys at this point with the new regime. But again, turnover on special teams. The linebacker room is really thin this year. Keeping one of these guys, I think, is advantageous. If you get them on a 1-year deal, great. If it takes 2 years and you split the baby on that right of first refusal tender and you offer them like 1.4 a year over the next 2 years, I think that's a win. But there's no reason to tender either one of these guys. Amon, we all like him. He's very productive on special teams. Don't know that he's ever going to make an impact on defense. And I think you need him for depth in the linebacker room, especially with potentially cutting Kendricks, and we're going to talk about Murray here in a bit. But you need one of those guys to stick for special teams and just basic depth and having bodies.
Yep, same. I'm not doing either. If it's a choice of the two, I'd rather Amon just because of his productivity on special teams. He seems like one of Ryan Ficken's guys there, so it makes sense from that standpoint. Also for depth. That term's going to come up a lot here because the last regime didn't leave us with very much in the cupboard. So you're going to have to hold on to some of these guys that if you had really a decently built out team, they would be names that you wouldn't give a second thought to. But yeah, I'm probably going to say, if anything, the hope would be that, you let Amon go out there, both of them, see what they can get. If not, take the deal that's on the table and just roll with one or the other. But I guess I push the chips in if we were between the two on Amon.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, this isn't really a group of guys that moves the needle. I think even if neither of them take a deal, I think it's a pretty easy position to fill with these guys. I know Amon's familiar with the system, but yeah, I think Amon would get the nod over Blake Lynch, who I don't really have much opinion on.
And I think the other thing too is got to keep in mind these RFA tenders are fully guaranteed. So this isn't like the ERFAs where if they don't make the team, you can cut them and there's nothing lost. Mm-hmm. You're talking about anywhere from $2.8 to $6.2 million fully guaranteed for a guy who may or may not make the roster. At this point, it just doesn't make sense. Let them test the market. Don't tender them, and see if they come back willing to take a lesser deal.
All right. Okay. And I fixed it. It's Blake Lynch now. I'm sorry. Copy and paste too fast. All right. So let's move on to the big list, unrestricted free agents. And the first one here, and we can just kind of go around. And of course I missed Michael Davis to start this. Awesome. This is what you do when you rush graphics to start off. So of this list that of course now isn't on there, Michael Davis, the cornerback. Craig, how are you feeling? Are you thinking about keeping Michael Davis? Are you letting him walk in free agency? How are you feeling?
All the best to Mike on his next endeavor.
Okay.
The end.
The end. Okay.
I mean, I'm sorry. We've been fooled here. We got one pretty decent year of production. It was a project that the Chargers felt like they wanted to invest in. They did. We saw some improvement over the course of his time here, but then there was a scheme change. It took him a little while to adjust there, and you could argue that he actually never really did fully. And so this is a situation now where it's just time to cut bait. Davis is almost 30 at this point. We've seen his ceiling. I don't think he's going to improve much more. And when you're talking about some of what you saw on the field last season, some really questionable effort plays, or lack thereof, should I say, just feels like it's time to move on. The secondary needs to be injected with new blood. Of course, it is already very thin, but unfortunately what remains, or what's there, as you can see on this list, isn't a ton to be able to lean on. So not a bunch of exciting names, but as far as what Davis brings to the table, we've probably seen the best of it, and it's just time for him to look for his new opportunity.
Boom. It's there now. Jamie?
Yeah, no, I agree with Craig. I don't think there's any reason to bring Mike back. They are going to be thin in the secondary. There is going to be a lot of turnover, but that's one area in particular where there really needs to be a lot of turnover. And I just don't see any reason to pay him again. So hopefully he lands somewhere and does well elsewhere. But I think that ship has sailed on that project. And I think it was over probably even before Telesco got fired, as it should be.
Well, I like this because we're already one in, and I'm going to go a different direction than you guys. I would consider re-signing Michael Davis, and the only reason I would do it is because I would do it for 1 year, and my expectation is he's depth at corner and he can help on special teams. Special teams is going to have a lot of turnover, and Michael Davis has proven when he's on special teams, he's one of the better special teams players. That's what got him on the field as a cornerback. So it just feels like if you look at the roster, they've got Zont, they've got Dean Leonard, and then everybody else is up for grabs. And to me, Michael Davis is a spot starter in the NFL, depth at cornerback. You don't want him starting, but I think if you can get him as your fourth corner, that's some really good depth. And I was looking at a deal that Ronald Darby just signed with the Ravens, which is another 30-year-old cornerback. He was a depth signing for Baltimore. He signed for 1 year, $1.7 million. So for me, it's a low risk. It's 1 year. You got depth. If he's your fourth corner, I think that's a pretty good deal, especially with kind of a low-end deal like that. He can compete for a starter spot in camp, but at worst, he is a very key special teams contributor and depth on your roster where you need it.
Question. Do we think that he would be willing to sign a 1 year deal? Because, I mean, there are the situations. We're talking about a vet here in the league who has some decent tape. There's a possibility that somebody would be willing to offer him a larger contract. Also, longer, taller, faster corners are like all the rage in the league, especially in the last few years. But then I would kind of argue that like the Chargers literally have his doppelganger on a futures contract. Who is that? Chris Wilcox, another BYU kid, 6'2", 4'3", 40, younger, 26 years old. So a potential project there. So if they fancy that type of player, they have basically his baby here on the roster as it is going forward. So, I mean, I get it. If you were talking about a short-term deal, but I mean, if we're talking, something beyond just a year, which he may actually garner on the market, believe it or not, I wouldn't be shocked if somebody offered it to him. I wouldn't be willing to pay him on like a 2-3 year deal. We're talking like 4.5, 5 per. I don't think I'd be willing to do that. And I think you also probably want him to be more than just a spot starter. If you're going to pay him, I mean, that's still not big money, but again, if you want a decent corner, I think he's at very best going to be a CB2. And right now, pretty much have a roster of CB2s and 3s. So, I mean, depth-wise makes sense, but ultimately, I don't know if he would be available for a 1 year deal. If he is, then, it is what it is. But I think he might garner something a little bit bigger.
You're making me jump ahead a little bit, but you mentioned CB4. I have them keeping Bassey, who I thought played pretty well down the stretch. He tackles, he covers, he can play inside, he can play outside. He's kind of the ideal CB4, and you can get him on a 1 year deal. I don't love him, but if you're talking depth and you're talking somebody who flashed a little bit and might have the opportunity to ascend in a different role, I think you're better investing like $1.5 million points, 1.75 million in a guy like Bassey, and seeing if you can squeeze more out of him than giving another contract to a 30-year-old Michael Davis.
Get out of my head, Jamie. It's on my list too.
Oh, you guys are sharing bad opinions. That's awesome. Now I like how you guys are sharing bad takes. Yeah, all right. So we are definitely differing on this because I don't see long in my mind. He's not going over 2 years anywhere. He's over 30 and he's been in decline. I don't see anybody taking a chance and signing to a 3 or 4 year deal at this point. He wasn't even a starter going into camp this last camp. So I feel like this is the strongest CB4 and a guy who, again, has been one of the best special teamers on the team for years when he's played there and wasn't a starting corner. That's a guy you want on special teams. So in my mind, I'm keeping Michael Davis. We can talk about Bassie when we get there. But all right, so you guys are letting Davis walk. I'm keeping Michael Davis for a 1 year deal if it's available. Let's move on to the big name here, and that's Austin Eckler. Jamie, keeping him?
No.
Okay.
I am not. Somebody's probably going to give him a 2 year deal and overpay him. And I just feel like I don't think he fits the way the Chargers are going to want to run the ball with Greg Roman. I think the only reason he's talking about wanting to be here at this point is because he realizes his options are limited and he's just trying to ride the fence, so to speak. I just don't see any reason to keep him, to be honest with you. I know fans have liked him. He's been explosive. He looked like he was a step and a half slower than normal last year. He was dropping balls, which he doesn't normally do. Lots of me first kind of mentality, talking about salaries and getting paid and kind of talking out of both sides of his mouth about Herbert. I just feel like that relationship has run its course, even with a new regime, and I don't see a reason to bring him back.
Correct.
Pretty easy. No for me on Eckler. Number one, what are his expectations contract-wise, especially off of the year that you just came off of? Doesn't bode really well for you to kind of do everything you did off-season and then walk into this year. Now, granted, the running game was horrible altogether. The offensive line, no back produced. So we'll shoot him a little bell there. But like Jamie mentioned, one of the calling cards was that he was really effective in the passing game, and you saw him dropping balls. There were a couple fumbles here or there. He just seemed like he put his foot in his mouth, kind of started his own little villainy arc here. And it's unfortunate because he was one of the fan favorites. And when he produced at a high level, he seemed like a lot, not just more likable because of what he was doing on the field, but now it's like, all the bravado and the way that he talks about things now don't match up with what he's recently put out there. So it may just be recency bias, but the NFL is a what have you done for me lately league. And unfortunately, I'm not paying Austin Eckler. What are we talking about? Like if he gets a 2-3 year deal, I'm not paying him upwards of like 22 mil for like 3 years. Is that like, it's probably going to want somewhere in the area of about 7.5 to 8 mil at least. I'm not paying that for Austin Eckler, unfortunately. Not a near 30-year-old back who's coming off of a steep decline. Well, at least 1 year in steep decline.
Yeah, with kind of the recent running back contracts, Jamal Charles got $4 million per with the Saints. Joe Mixon got 5.75 and James Conner got 7 with the Cardinals. So if you're, even at 4 million, that just seems way too rich for a guy like Austin Eckler. That he's had years to prove that he, they basically gave him the keys and let him prove that he's an RB1, and never has he ever proven that he can be anything more than maybe like a 1A to a two-headed monster. He can never just be the guy. And this year showed that whole dynamic playmaking ability was starting to drain from him during the season. And he had every opportunity to test the market last offseason. It was not good. His play further decreased his value, I'm sure. So, if I'm looking at even at least 4 million per range, I'm out. There's no upside here to re-signing Eckler. And other than he, was a great underdog story where he came from, and working his way to being RB1 for the Chargers is great, but it feels like he kind of burned all that built up goodwill he got with the fans, and that's all been faded. And with all the talking this offseason, I don't know the fans will really like it. This is obviously a whole new regime here with the Chargers. I'm not sure they love it either, but really in terms of the scheme and what Greg Roman's going to want to do, Austin Eckler just is not that guy. So I'm saying no, thanks, and I'm letting Eckler go test the market.
I also don't think he's going to get paid anywhere near what he thinks he's worth because, like you already stated, Garrett, he's not a lead back. So if you're talking about backfield by committee situation, or at least a dual one, how much are you willing to pay a backfield with split backs? Eckler, again, fancies himself one of the best backs in the NFL, and last year he was nowhere near that. I mean, he had an argument here in years past, but unfortunately, it's just the way things work with running backs. I respect what they do. They take a beating, and it's probably one of the most abused positions on a football field. But at the end of the day, I guess you get what you can get. Whatever contract you can situate for yourself, the better for it. More power to you. But unfortunately, I just don't see him being or getting exactly what he thinks he will on the open market. So interested to see what that next deal is for him.
Did I say Jamal Charles instead of Jamal Williams when I was talking about the Saints?
You did.
You did.
You've been on one tonight, so I just figured I'd let you roll with it.
Come on, man. Don't let me. He's not even in the league. He's retired. Don't let me say retired players. Jesus. Jamal Williams is obviously what I meant. All right. Next up, number 3 on our list here is the tight end, Gerald Everett. Jamie?
I think they have to keep Gerald Everett. I think it's smart to keep Gerald Everett. I just think you do it with the understanding that he's going to be tight end 2 instead of tight end 1. He's still productive as a receiver. If he's tight end 2, you don't have to count on him as much as a blocker. He as the roster is currently built, and I would hope this would change, he's probably their best yak option at the moment. At least when you look at how they use these guys. So I don't think there's any downside to keeping him. I was kind of looking at numbers. I was looking at like a 1-year, $5 million deal for an aging tight end. A little bit less than what he was making per year on his last deal. Still a decent chunk of money. Only 1 year, probably limited guarantees. And he just buys you time. And he's a placeholder at tight end 2, especially since you don't know what to expect out of Parham. I really think their hands are tied. They've kicked the can down the road, so to speak, with tight end for so long since Hunter Henry left that I really think their hands are tied. They have to bring Gerald Everett back and draft 1, if not 2 tight ends this year. So just get it done. He's just a steady veteran. He was one of the guys who they were saying on the sidelines during the Raider game, one of the few guys who was pissed about the way they were playing and was trying to rally guys to play better. I think he's a leader and he's productive. So he's one of the few guys on this list that I say yes to bring back, and they kind of have to. It's a smart move.
So let me run a number by you because I was doing contract comps too, because I think I agree when you look at the list right now, it's Stone Smart and Donald Parham. So to me, this feels like the deal that Tyler Higbee got with the Rams. The numbers kind of matched up. They were both turning 30 around when they were getting their contract, and he signed a 2-year, $17 million deal. I believe there was a ripcord after year 1, but they didn't take it. Would you sign him for $8.5 million per year?
No,
that's too rich.
It's too rich for me. I would not give him a multi-year deal either. He's productive, but I don't think he's productive enough to warrant a 2-year deal. He's a placeholder in my book. I mean, it's underselling what he did for the offense the last couple of years, but he's not somebody that you want to count on to be productive for 2 years. Even with a ripcord, I would not give him 2-year deals. I think it's 1, you try to keep him somewhere between $5 and $6 million. And if he doesn't want it, then you go find somebody who will.
Okay.
Yep. In my notes, I have bridge tight end 2 because that's how I see him. It feels a little bit, it feels like you're minimizing what he did for the team last year. But he was their best yak option. It's unfortunate, though, because in last year's draft, the Chargers missed on a very deep tight end class. And so they basically pigeonholed themselves into a situation where they absolutely need to bring him back and still draft talent. This year's group is not, from what I've seen thus far, is definitely not as talented as last year's was. So they'll probably have to spend a little bit of draft capital on it, probably 2 tight ends to kind of figure this out moving forward. But you can't, unless you're willing to spend a very early draft pick on a tight end. You don't want to basically take a chance like that to go into the season if you're not going to make tight end a priority this year with some rookies who aren't of the highest ilk where talent is concerned or pedigree. So I think you absolutely have to bring Everett back if you can use him as a receiving option in the passing game as a tight end too. I think that really helps Herbert out. They have that rapport. He is effective. And he's someone that can make your offense, as far as a complementary piece, help it to be able to be explosive moving forward. So if you have an idea to bring him back for a year, if you can pay him somewhere around $5-6 million in order for that to happen, great. I don't think he's a multi-year option either, nor would I pay him anywhere in the vicinity of, $8+ million a year for 2 years or more. So, bring him back 1 year and then figure it out in the draft and then move forward.
Yeah, to me, it feels like Everett will go and try to get the Higbee number and be like, hey, listen, our numbers are pretty comparable. I think we deserve $8.5 million. But I think what Mike Gesicki got with the Patriots, I think it was $4.5 million. It was 1 year deal.
Yeah.
That's more in the neighborhood and makes more sense to me. If that's the number, I'm taking it. If he's going anywhere above 7, I'm out. So depending on what he wants, if it's under 7, I'm willing to kind of, if he wants to shake me down for 6.5, I'll take it. But I want to push it down to 4 to 5, somewhere in that range for sure, because he is a tight end too. And I don't think he's going to find a market for a tight end 1 money anyway, because Higbee is the tight end 1 for the Rams. So I think the argument is that Everett hasn't proved to be a tight end 1 in this league yet. He is definitely a tight end 2. Until they can find somebody better. The blocking concerns me a little bit in this new system because it's going to be real run heavy. But I think, with an athletic tight end like Gerald Everett and a guy who really, I know he was fighting during that Raider game, but every time he touched that ball, he was fighting for yards, man. He was an angry runner this year. And I love to see it. And so I'm re-signing Gerald Everett if the price is right. But I think really, they got to go in the draft drafting 1, most likely 2 tight ends. They need the depth.
Yeah, I agree.
All right. Next on this list is Kenneth Murray. I'm not doing it. He might have had a career year with the Chargers. But the Chargers don't really have many linebackers outside of Deion Henley, or Deion Henley. I already am mispronouncing his name. But it just feels like Murray shipped a sail. We kind of talked about a little bit of some guys in the exclusive rights free agents that kind of the experiments have gone. I mean, it just feels like, some team will probably see the uptick in his tackles and sacks this past season, probably gush about his athletic ability out of college and that he's only 25 and give him a deal. I wouldn't. I was kind of looking at the Josie Jewell deal with the Broncos, which was 2 years, $11 million. So would you give him $5.5 million for 2 years? Part of me would be really curious to see what Harbaugh would do with Kenneth Murray and his athleticism, but he hasn't been good enough. And to me, he's a rotational linebacker and not good enough to be a starter. So I'm, even with as empty as this linebacker group is, I would not re-sign Kenneth Murray. Would you guys?
I did not think I would do this.
Uh-oh.
And I hate myself for it.
Uh-oh.
Hear me out.
He's going to do it.
Hear me out.
Boo. No, boo.
Just listen. All right.
All right. Okay.
I didn't want to do it. I went in thinking I was going to let him go. And I really wanted to let him go. But the state of the linebacker room is a little scary right now. There's like 0 depth whatsoever. And I looked at it more from
does adding Kenneth Murray make more depth?
It makes them deeper. I mean, it gives them more bodies, I guess.
I'm
not looking at him as a starter. I'm not looking at him as a starter.
Okay, go ahead.
I'm looking at this kind of the way that Devin White was treated when he left the Steelers last year, which was former first-round pick, uber athletic, but has not played well and has not lived up to the pedigree. He got a 1 year, $3 or $3.5 million contract. That's what I'm looking at for Murray. I'm going to him and I'm saying, look, your depth. You've got to earn your way onto the roster. You're not getting any guarantees whatsoever. You're going to play special teams, and you're going to have to earn every inch, every second, every snap if you want to make this team out of camp. And then I see how he responds. And if he wants to go find a long-term deal, a 2 or 3 year deal somewhere else, by all means, have at it. But if he's open to earning a spot and showing what he's, that he was worth that first round pick, then I wouldn't be opposed to giving him a 1 year, like $3.5 million deal just to have some bodies in that linebacker room going into camp. I don't love it. Can't stand the guy. I don't think he's very good, but they have nothing there. And at least with him, it's a little, maybe slightly more than nothing. Go ahead, kill me.
Jamie, I respect the fact that I get it. I get the justification, and I understand why you did it. But all I can think about is the fact that his career year, think about that. Think about this year being his career year, and now understand where the bar is. It was literally in hell. And you're taking a guy who was already overdrafted, and you're asking him to come back and prove himself and be a contributor at the second level of the defense, I guess, in some way, shape, or form, even if not a starter. I get the fact that you want to look at him for depth. But the way that I look at Kenneth Murray is like this. It's almost similar to Patrick Queen. If you had like an all-world linebacker playing next to him, I'd be fine with it. But you almost have to have someone who can cover all his deficiencies and allow him to do the thing that I guess he, quote unquote, does the best. But if you're going to have him in there and expecting him to diagnose instead of being like a see-ball, get-ball linebacker, I want no parts of it. And there isn't a Roquan Smith walking through that door unless something wild happens this offseason. So with that being said, I don't want to see him on the field, period, anymore. Not even in a scenario where he's essentially just being additional depth. I'm completely over the project. I think he is who he's going to be. And though he played much better this season, some of the same issues that have plagued him throughout his career, his young career thus far, still exist. And maybe you can scheme it up to where you can do some things that help, again, cover those deficiencies. But I think he's probably better served next to a veteran linebacker who's super savvy, who's playing near the top of their game. So with that being said, I don't care. I don't care if you can get him back dirt cheap. I want absolutely nothing to do with him moving forward, and he can be somebody else's problem.
Yeah, I'm out.
No, I get it. And I was in the same boat. I'm just looking at, you're talking about going into the offseason now with 2 linebackers in a room that requires at least 5. So you think they're in a position to be able to add 3 linebackers in the offseason? That's asking a lot with all the other needs.
Here's the thing, though. I'm also counting, and this almost seems like it may not actually make sense in the grand scheme of things, but I believe that this coaching staff can improve upon some of these younger linebackers that are currently here, and even some of these project guys, and get them to play over their heads. I don't think Kenneth Murray is going to get any better. So, if you want to give him the benefit of the doubt and also say that if you bring him back, maybe this coaching staff can help bring the best out of him, I just think we've probably seen the best that he's going to be. So I'd be willing to roll with some of the younger guys. And if you want to draft a couple of guys, which they're going to have to do, I trust this new staff's ability to develop. And until they prove me wrong, that's what I'm rolling with.
I'm not talking about him even being on the field. I'm just talking about him being in the room and maybe playing special teams.
Why in the room? We don't want him in the room, Jamie.
They need somebody in the room.
Then suit up.
You said somebody.
Want somebody? Put the pads on, Jamie. All right. Okay. So Jamie kept his boy Kenneth Murray. Craig and I are out on Jamie's boy.
He is
Kenneth
not my
Murray.
boy.
Let's move on to Austin Johnson.
You take that shit back right now.
Keep denying it, because the more you deny it, the more it's going to be
You
your
know how
guy.
this works, Jamie. You did it to yourself.
You should have just ignored it and kept going.
I did it to myself by being rational. Okay.
Rationality. Rationale.
What's that? All right. So next, Austin Johnson, interior defensive lineman. Craig, how you feeling about AJ?
Wait, I'm sorry. For some reason, you went mute for a second.
Oh, did I?
Yeah, maybe it's my computer. I can hear you now. Well,
Okay.
I'm sorry. Repeat that.
We're talking about Austin Johnson. You keeping him, cutting him?
Oh, Austin Johnson. Nah, Austin can roll. It's unfortunate too because it seemed like that they had made a really good pickup there, and he dealt with an injury that seemed like it affected his play moving forward. And he's coming off of that and didn't have the greatest year. I think we had this conversation in a few group chats. Like there were games where we just asked, where is he? Like, is he being effective at all? If he's not making plays, is he at least muddying things up? And I mean, it just feels like one of those guys who maybe is dealing with a situation where the injury maybe sapped a little bit of his athleticism. But I just don't feel like he's productive enough to try to bring back. It's another situation, though, where we're talking about bodies in the room. And so we can make an argument for depth and bringing guys back as depth pieces. But as far as what you're going to get out of him, I think sad to say, we've seen the best of him, which wasn't great. But I'm letting it go. And I'm looking for some younger talent to come in. There may be already some on the roster again that has an opportunity to come in and play, and maybe man some of that nose or 3 tech, whatever you want to utilize them as. I can't remember. Did Austin play more nose or 3 tech this year? I don't remember, but however it went.
I think he was mostly like a 3 and a 5.
3 and a 5. Okay. So yeah, I mean, you technically don't have a disruptor at 3 as a 3 tech right now. I mean, maybe Christopher Hinton, potentially, former Michigan guy. But I don't think that Austin is going to be that person. He hasn't been that player since he's been here. So it's probably just time to cut bait and get some younger, cheaper talent in.
Jamie, you keeping him?
No, I'm not. I thought he was going to be a really good signing when they signed him. I thought he actually played quite well in a very understated way before he got hurt. But he just didn't bounce back very well. And I don't see a reason to extend that at all. So too bad. It's a bummer because I thought he'd be really good for them, but it just didn't work and it's time to move on.
I've gone back and forth on this a lot. It feels like with the new system, they're going to want to stop the run a lot, and they're going to need rotational guys like Austin Johnson, which are going to be key in the system. And I know he's not flashy, and it was definitely a down year for him, but they're going to need a lot of interior guys to pitch in to stop the run. And I don't know that they have a lot. To me, just looking at like a contract, it felt like a Kyle Pecco type signing where it's like both guys don't put up a ton of numbers. They're not going to stuff the stat sheet, but they're going to, hopefully free up the guys around him. And Pecco signed a 1-year, $1 million deal. And he's done that in back-to-back seasons with the Raiders and Titans. So if you're talking about a 1-year, $1 million deal, maybe add some like small incentives, maybe some playtime bonuses if you want. I think it provides some veteran rotational depth where you've got guys like Tito and Matlock, even Gerard Clark, if you want to as well, in that kind of rotation. I wouldn't mind that. But if he walked, I mean, maybe his best days are behind him because it looks like it. But I could see a veteran signing like that. That could make sense to me.
That's the kind of signing that they used to always make with like a Jacques Césaire or somebody like that.
Damian Square,
that's the other name I was thinking of. Yeah, where you let him walk and you ride it out and see what happens in free agency, and then in the 3rd or 4th wave of free agency, if he's still hanging around, you go out and see if he wants to sign for 1 year for almost nothing.
Yeah.
But definitely not a priority and not somebody I'm rushing to bring back.
No, not at all. All right. Next up, running back Joshua Kelly. Jamie?
Nope. I just not a fan. I don't think there's any reason to bring him back. I think that running back room really, really, really needs to. What?
Not a fan. Just like trashes the guy.
I didn't trash him. I could have been worse.
General.
That was mild. That was mild.
This is Jamie's heel turn episode. I like this. Not a fan. He's like thumbs down on Joshua Kelly.
I they need to rebuild that running back room really badly, and I just don't see how he fits. I don't think he's got the vision or the burst or the wiggle to be successful in Roman's scheme. I just don't see what he offers at this point. Another one, it didn't work. It's time to move on.
I think it's the juxtaposition of like Joshua Kelly being like a very soft-spoken, like generally like always a nice guy, to not a fan on him. Just made me laugh. But
just on the field.
Yeah. I know, of course, that wasn't a personal dig, but it was just funny. But I'm with you. Not that I'm not a fan, that I'm not re-signing him. I'm letting Isaiah Spiller be my RB2. I'm drafting an RB1, maybe picking up another running back in free agency if you can. First cheap enough, maybe even take a late round flyer on running back for my RB3. Kelly is probably going to get, maybe $2 million in free agency or so. I'm not spending that on him. Chargers are somewhat cash strapped and they got to make some wise investments. This would not be one of them. I'm letting Kelly go. I'm moving on. Craig?
Keep this one short and sweet. In the spirit of X-Men 97 that we'll be releasing here shortly.
Let's go.
Cyclops can kick rocks. I'm not going to be as nice because the dude has, nice guy. Really nice guy.
Are you saying he has the vision of Cyclops? Is that what you're saying?
It's really unfortunate because the dude,
he's got the wiggle of Professor X.
I'd say the wiggle of oh god, Juggernaut, and the burst of the thing or something.
Garrett just broke the pod.
Oh god, yeah.
Wow. Oh man. So he doesn't have legs? That's mean. That's way worse than anything I said.
That's meaner than what Jamie said. Yeah.
Well, I guess we're picking up the slack. Jamie's a good cop tonight. But no, man, it's unfortunate because great guy. He's made a couple big splash plays here or there, but the consistency just isn't there. And as a running back, he's lacking one of the major things you need to be able to succeed at the position: vision. And when I say he lacks it, man, dude's barely got any of it. So again, off to your next adventure, man. Safe travels. Best of luck to you.
The uncanny abilities of Joshua Kelly, not on the Chargers roster. Let's go to Alohi Gilman. Very polarizing on Twitter the last week or so. Jamie, are you keeping the quote unquote fan favorite, Alohi Gilman?
When did he become a fan favorite?
This offseason, apparently.
In the last week.
This past year.
I think Gilman's kind of going to be a good test case to see how much the remaining members of the Chargers front office have learned from previous mistakes. Gilman had a good year. He's scrappy. He made some plays. He forced some turnovers. He had a fantastic year in the last year of his deal, a year that he also never really matched in previous seasons. And I'm just not sure. The previous regime would have given him a long-term deal. Bought in, they would have given him that like $30 million deal they gave to die after one good year. I think the problem with Gilman is a lot of the plays that he made last year are not plays that he is likely to repeat next year. Sneaking into piles and ripping the ball free. A lot of really good hustle plays, but not a lot of plays that are measurable. Not measurable, that's not the right word. It's just not like transferable, not something that you can realistically expect to repeat itself. It's like drafting JT Woods because he had 6 interceptions fall into his lap without really understanding where those interceptions came from. It's the same kind of thing with Gilman. He had a really good year. I would not give him a multi-year deal. I was kind of looking at it as he needs to prove himself one more time before he gets paid a big deal. And they do have needs in the room. If they wanted to offer him like a 1-year, $3 million deal to see if he could come in and do it again, I'd be okay with that. The problem is he's really redundant with Derwin. Everything he does well, Derwin does better. And he's not particularly good deep. I think they need to get better deep so that they can have Derwin play in the box more. So I would not bring him back. I would not be opposed to giving him a 1-year deal for like $3 million to see if he could prove it. I have a feeling he's going to get a 3 or 4-year deal, probably from the Raiders, for way more money than he's worth, and he's going to be looking for a job in 2 years.
There's a lot of Bears fans who are looking for him to replace Eddie Jackson.
Have at it. I hope he gets a 5-year deal for like $60 million, and they get a huge comp pick for him because I don't want to throw that money at him.
Ooh, that's a big brain move. I like that, Jamie.
You can tell who only watches highlights.
Hey, maybe that's why we need to build him up on Twitter. Maybe that's what we got to do.
We haven't been doing a job then. I was going to say, you can tell who's been watching just highlights as opposed to paying attention to a player throughout their career. It's a sensitive situation because of where they are in the secondary. And you're looking at experience going out of the door and then realizing they don't have a ton of it and they get really young really fast. But I agree. He is redundant in the way that he is a much lesser athletic Derwin James. But the fact that he's had the ability, and this is where the Chargers have historically fallen in the trap. You get a guy who overperforms in a contract year, has the best year of his career, and they look to pay him because they feel like they finally figured it out with him, and that's the player moving forward. He's their guy. I'm not giving Holoe a multi-year contract. Similarly to Jamie, give him a single year, let him come back, prove it again, and then at that point, if he blows it up, maybe talk about a bigger deal moving down the line, but you have to show me again. Being in the right place at the right time was something he did a lot of this year. He was very opportunistic in creating turnovers, so we appreciate that. But it's not something that's been his calling card throughout his career. He hasn't done it consistently up until this point. So I don't want to call last year an anomaly. I would definitely want to see it again before, giving him a larger deal. But somebody out there absolutely will. And it would be such a Tom Telesco move to get him on the Raiders. And it's another one of those interdivisional things where you can just feel there's at least one or two of these guys that are going to end up over there. And he's probably option 1A if I had to bet any money on it. So I could definitely see him getting a longer term deal. But if we're talking about a return to the Chargers under this next regime, come back and prove it again, buddy. If not, go find your money elsewhere.
Please go get paid somewhere else. A lot of money.
A lot of money. So the Chargers get a comp pick for it. And that's what
Mr. Ortiz.
Yes.
That's the second time you called him Horowitz.
I know. I said it earlier. I know. And somebody said it in the chat and pointed
did
it out.
Did you drink before we
I did a lot.
Okay.
Yes.
I was wondering. Makes sense now.
I drank a lot. No. I don't know what's going on. Jamie got it out of his system, but now I am just keeping it going, apparently. I was going to make the same points. I mean, it really is. I do think that his price range is in the $3 million range. That's kind of where I had him pegged to. But he's just not a good fit for the Chargers. Everything Gilman does, Derwin does a hell of a lot better. Gilman's way better near the line of scrimmage. He is not good enough as a free safety. I know he had a career year, much like Kenneth Murray, but when you really look at it from a game-to-game basis, he just was not good enough on this defense. A lot of big plays were because of him. I know he got some turnovers, and that's what people focus on. But Alohi Gilman might try to convince you on Twitter that he's good. I'm here to tell you he is not. And I am definitely passing on Gilman. I do not want him on the roster. I think there are guys now. I don't know about JT Woods because who knows what the hell he is at this point, if he's even a football player at this point. But you've got Raheem Lane, who we talked about a little bit earlier. You've got AJ Finley, who we liked during camp last year. There's some veteran safeties here on this list too that are coming up. I'm more inclined to start to develop my younger guys than to give Alohi Gilman a contract. So I'm letting him walk.
There's actually another name. I'm sure we're going to get to it in a bit. That I feel like, other than Raheem Lane, could actually be a really good replacement for Alohi and at a much lower cost.
Yeah, we'll talk about it. All right, let's move on to Easton Stick, and I think we can kind of burn through these pretty fast here going on from here on out. But I'm glad we finally got to see what Easton Stick could do against starting NFL defenses. It's not just during the preseason, and boy, it was as bad, if not worse, as advertised. because during the preseason, there were little glints and hopes and flashes of, hey, maybe he could, I don't know, be fun to watch. But I am thanking Stick for being the captain of the tank. I'm grateful for that 5th overall pick, but he is not good enough to be an NFL backup quarterback. I am not re-signing Easton Stick, nor should he sign with another NFL team.
Yeah, no argument.
Okay.
I would not sign him. I think we saw what we saw, and it's time to move on. But this is another one of those situations where it's an easy fix at backup quarterback, and they have so many holes to fill. Could you see them doing it? I could, but there's nobody in that room besides John Spanos who has any ties to him at this point, which is giving me hope.
What about Day? Shane Day.
I was thinking more front office.
Oh, okay. Craig?
Oh, man. It's time for him to go, but also when you're looking at the landscape out there, I mean, how much money are you going to spend on a backup quarterback? I mean, how much money are you going to have to do it? We have to see what sort of moves they make here in the offseason. But also, I mean, are you going to draft another one? Tried that last year. Didn't work out all that well. I mean, I'm not saying that you can't do it again, but it's probably going to be another late round flyer. It might be worth it just to see what a 6th, 7th round QB can come in and do. I would imagine it can't be much worse than Easton Stick. So I think you can get rid of him. But again, it just kind of feels like one of those easy to make moves. And yeah, Jamie mentioned it. There aren't very many ties to him. It could be one of those scenarios where maybe Herbert wants him back. And so he's got the vote of the starting QB to get him back on the roster potentially. But as far as I'm concerned, it's time to try another project altogether. Easton came in and yeah, he was the captain of the tank, man. We appreciate you for your contribution. It will be greatly appreciated here moving forward. Your work and suckage was not in vain.
And you say, how bad could a late round quarterback be? Could it be worse than Stick?
Hey,
we just had Max Duggan here.
Listen, I was purposely leaving him out. See, you had to bring him back into the equation.
You said a late round quarterback, and I go, we just did.
No, an actual quarterback. That's not what I would consider the gentleman whose name I won't repeat.
He's not an actual quarterback.
No.
Okay. All right. Next up, Jalen Guyton. Craig?
Dad by Jalen, huh? Nah, Jalen can roll, man. There was that report that he had with Herbert a couple years back. He gets the injury, comes back, and they tried to make him a possession receiver. I have no idea what the hell that was about. But no, man, there's really no redeeming qualities to Jalen at this point. It seems like he may have lost a step. Maybe it's due to injury. I mean, yeah, you have a lower injury to your lower extremities is absolutely going to affect your speed. But it's a one-trick pony situation, and I think they just need to get more well-rounded in the wide receiver room. And again, I mean, at this point, what are you really getting from him? I guess he could be a body, but I don't know. I don't see there being much more rope left for his career as a Charger. I don't think there needs to be. It's one of those situations where if he was just a part of the roster, maybe on his last year or something, I can understand you keeping him around because of the history that he's had with Herbert. But I don't think you need to go out of your way to try to re-sign him. It's a situation where you've gotten the best out of him. You didn't expect to get a ton out of him. And it's just time for a new opportunity for him and the Chargers.
Yeah, there's no room for him. I mean, they've got 4 wide receivers in the room right now. They need to come out of the draft with at least 1, if not 2. And they're already not likely to get too much out of Darius Davis as a wide receiver. So I just feel like there's just no point in bringing him back. Even if Herbert likes him, he just doesn't offer much. The one thing he did well, he doesn't do anymore. So there's really no point in bringing him back.
Yeah, that Jalen Guyton redemption tour was very short-lived. And hopefully it has ended with the Chargers. I am not bringing him back. If you want a body, you got a exclusive rights free agent in Keelan Doss, who gets the vet minimum. And here's your wide receiver body for you. Jalen Guyton, no thanks. I'm passed on him. All right, next up, interior defensive lineman Nick Williams. Jamie?
This is somebody I would actually bring back. I know he's like 33, 34 years old. But he's productive. he was very good last year playing in spurts. He's kind of a leader for a very young room of defensive tackles. You figure Austin Johnson's likely to move on. You figure Morgan Fox is going to get cut. There just isn't a lot of veteran presence in that room. So I think there's value to bringing him back. And I think Minter and Harbaugh could find something productive for him to do in limited snaps, and he wouldn't cost much. So I think it makes sense to bring him back just as a body. And he probably doesn't cost much in terms of guarantees, if anything. So if he winds up not making the roster, it's no harm, no foul. There's no downside. There's no upside, but there's also no downside. You're just talking about having a body and potentially having a leader. And I think there's some value to that.
Craig?
Yep, there's your old rugged vet. I mean, I didn't realize he was as old as he was until I looked at that today, but he was rather productive last season. And you're looking at an opportunity to have him come in there and be in the mix amongst some younger guys and some cats that you bring in here or in the draft and allow him to be a leader in the locker room. And I think he's still got some gas left in the tank, so it's fine. It won't cost you very much, I don't believe. So, yeah, absolutely. Why not? You need that leadership up front, and you need someone who can be able to step in there and plug the run. Everybody that you can get that has the ability to do that, you probably want, especially on this team due to its history. So I'm absolutely bringing him back. And as long as it's on the cheap, I have absolutely no problem with it.
All right. So we just went about it in different ways. So I took Austin Johnson as the vet and you took Nick Williams. I took Austin Johnson in the hopes of there's more upside there and he's younger than a Nick Williams who's going to be 34 coming up here. But either way, it was a 1-year deal for Austin Johnson, a 1-year deal with Nick Williams. It's give or take here. It's fine either way. I'm just hoping that they can squeeze some potential out of Austin Johnson, Minter, and Harbaugh again. That's my hope. But all right, so I kept Austin Johnson. You guys keep Nick Williams. Dean Marlowe. Craig?
So Dean showed himself to be a rather competent safety this past year when he was brought in. Unfortunately, he did lose his role as the season went on. But for a spurt, he did show that he was able to play the deep portion of the field without, having the team getting the top blown off of it. He was one of the contributing factors to being able to slow down those bigger plays. But it seemed like his play tapered off a little bit as the season went on. He's also a little bit older player. I think Marlowe's 31, 32 at this point. So when you're looking at some of the younger guys that the Chargers have available to them and the fact that he played as much as he did had to do with some injuries, you're looking at some guys coming back that are going to be cheaper and hopefully they are available. But Marlowe did what he did for the short stint that he was there. We appreciate it, but I think it's time to move on from him as well because there are some younger guys behind him that I think need to see some time.
Jamie, you keeping Marlowe?
He's another guy that I would look at down the line in the third or fourth wave of free agency. I would look at him more as maybe a potential practice squad stash as a veteran, kind of like what they did with Richard Rodgers a couple years ago, where you have him on the roster in case you're desperate and you just need somebody to come in and fill some snaps. I think he offers some special teams value. He offers some value at safety and limited snaps. And I think there's value to that on the practice squad. I'm not sure I would use a roster spot on him at this point. So I'd probably let him float around for a while, go back to him maybe after the draft and see what he's thinking and maybe try to get him on the practice squad. But other than that, I liked him. I thought he played well in spots, but not a priority, not something that I feel like an overwhelming need to keep.
Yeah, me neither. It feels like there's a lot of guys that could you can give like a 1-year, like $1 million deal to and just be fine with it just to fill some spots. And Dean Marlowe feels like he could be one of those guys. He's played corner in the NFL. He's played both safety spots. He had some impressive reps, but was kind of up and down overall. He's going to be 32. I mean, an upgrade would be nice, but it seems like, they might need some veteran presence in that safety room, maybe to help some of these younger DBs. I wouldn't mind signing him to like a 1-year, $1.1 million deal or something low that he signed before. I can basically take it or leave it, but I would rather take a Dean Marlowe and his versatility over Alohi Gilman and what his contract would be. Next up, Will Clapp. He has played way more snaps than any of us expected. I think that's commendable at some point, but this has got to be his last stop with the Chargers. Even, it feels like Lindsley's going to be retiring. It doesn't matter. Clapp has to go. I mean, it's going to have to get upgraded this offseason, but, I'm giving Zion Johnson and Jordan McFadden some looks at center in camp, and please God, no more Will Clapp.
I don't think we see Zion getting snaps at center. I just don't think they'll move him for a second offseason in a row. But I do think Clapp needs to go. I think the only real value he offered was a familiarity with the scheme when they brought him in the year before last. And now the scheme is changing. And he didn't play that well in the scheme that he knew to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
So I think this relationship has run its course and it's time to move on. You've got Hymas, you've got McFadden, and I would be fairly confident they're going to come out of the first 3 rounds of the draft with a young center. So there's just really no reason to push this any further. Maybe if they don't get a center in the draft, you think about it after the draft. But even then, there's got to be a better option somewhere.
Craig?
Seen enough, man. And again, it's unfortunate because we have the same high school. We're from the same high school, and I would love to be able to compliment the guy, but I'm not going to give him any of those props just because of that. To quote a famous leader of men and horrible game manager, he is a backup for a reason. So we need not see him get extended snaps ever again, and hope to never have to, because the results were not ideal. And again, maybe he can latch on elsewhere, but I think the time with the Chargers is up, and with good reason.
All right, Jamie, Will Greer.
This is someone I could see them keeping as QB2, potentially. Harbaugh's going to be familiar with him because he was in college when Harbaugh was at Michigan. He's a guy who was reasonably well thought of coming out, still pretty young. Hasn't really done much. He's not going to command a whole lot of money. You could get him on a 1-year deal to kind of, be a placeholder, so to speak. So I could see them keeping him. I think it makes some sense to have somebody who's been around, who's been in NFL systems, who Harbaugh has seen play and is familiar with. Would not surprise me at all if they keep him. And it shouldn't cost much, maybe 1 year, $1.5 to $2 million, somewhere in that range.
Mm.
Yeah, I think they keep him around initially. The stick experiment should be over. If you want to give Greer a shot, get him in the camp, see what he can do. If you want to have him be a temporary placeholder, great. But as far as a long-term option as a backup quarterback, I don't see that happening. But initially, I think they'll probably keep him around. It makes too much sense.
Yeah, if I had to choose between the two, I'd take Greer just because he's more of an unknown, and I've seen too much of Stick, and I'm sick of it. So I'd take Greer in that instance, but they both could go. I don't care. But if they do sign Greer, it's got to be short term, a year for, again, like a $1.5 million, maybe. Yeah. All right, next up, Alex Erickson. Craig?
Oh, boy. This was weird because he became one of those, like, cult Chargers wide receivers that people, like, latch on to. And, I mean, he showed some pretty solid production. He made some pretty big catches to keep the sticks moving. But another 30-plus-year-old wide receiver that I don't think plays well in the new offensive scheme. I'm not sure if there's a really good fit for him. He doesn't offer anything that is, I guess, sets him apart. He's not a burner, decent route runner. He's got good hands, but you can kind of cycle through the Rolodex of Chargers wide receivers that you can really attribute that to. He's pretty diminutive in size, and again, he's got the age thing that's not working in his favor. So I think you move on, get another younger option, have him come in, and again, the skill set doesn't necessarily set him apart. I feel like he's a dime a dozen in the NFL, and you can probably find one of those guys or a couple of them in the draft.
Yeah, I'm not spending a second pursuing a 31-year-old wide receiver who couldn't stick on a team before last year. Nice story. He made some big catches.
Oh, yeah.
And I know people kind of, hung on to him or clammed on to him or however you want to put it at the end of the season, but I mean, 31 years old, wide receiver. If there's no room for Jalen Guyton on the roster with some of the plays that he's made in the league, there's certainly no room for Alex Erickson. They need to get younger, faster, more explosive. Erickson does none of those things, and there's going to be no emotional ties to him with any of the coaching or front office. So I don't see why they would bring him back, short of maybe a practice squad. But again, 31 years old. What are you really looking to develop a 31-year-old?
Yeah, unless you're just filling in depth, and they can get better there. Got some extended snaps, didn't expect it. Filled in nicely though. Made some clutch catches when the Chargers needed it. But he's not a guy they should bring back. So no, letting Alex Erickson walk. Next up, safety Jalen Hawkins. Craig, I think you were alluding to him a little bit earlier, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, this makes sense to me to keep him around. Number one, he's younger. He took over for Dean Marlowe, got about 5 games worth of play in. He only had like 1 pass breakup, but he can play slot. He can be a split safety up top. He's also a pretty good tackler and contribute on special teams. So I think it's someone that you can, if you needed to, if Alohi prices himself out, here's an easy replacement that costs you not very much. So I think it makes perfect sense to keep him around. Again, young talent, cheap, and those are your 2 key words, younger, cheaper. So it just seems like he's a good fit for the roster, at least going into next year for sure.
Yeah, if you go into next year with Hawkins as safety 3 or safety 4, you're in pretty good shape. I think he's still 26 or 27 years old. You're talking about maybe, again, $1 million, $1.5 million. Maybe if they really like him, they give him a 2-year deal with a parachute or a ripcord after year 1. But some versatility, some special teams value. You're looking at a roster that's going to be without Gilman. It's going to be most likely without Dean Marlowe. It's going to be almost certainly without JT Woods. We finally realized that Mark Webb doesn't actually exist. So they need some bodies back there. They need some depth behind Derwin, and I think Hawkins is a decent fit, like I said, as safety 3 or safety 4 and contributing on special teams.
Yeah, just like Dean Marlowe, Hawkins came in partway through the year. I think the Chargers end up signing one of either Dean Marlowe or Jalen Hawkins just to fill the room, and knowing that it's going to come cheap, I think they end up signing one of these 2 guys. Jalen Hawkins makes a ton of sense. I could see Dean Marlowe with his versatility. But yeah, either one's going to be short term. They're both going to come cheap, and I could see one of, probably not both, but one of Dean Marlowe or Jalen Hawkins sticking for next year. Next up is tight end Nick Vannett. He's strictly a blocking tight end in this stage of his career, which is going to be key in this offense going forward. So it makes sense on paper. I mean, it just feels like of the 8 games this season with Vannett, he didn't really pop for me. I think I'd pass on a 31-year-old tight end with no receiving upside. I know they need bodies in that room, but I think they could find another veteran here. I'm just letting Vannett walk. You guys keeping him?
No, I don't really see a need to. He kind of is what he is at this point. You're not going to get much more out of him. No real need to bring him back.
Yeah.
No, he can go. Even from what I saw of him, even being a blocking tight end, he wasn't really up to snuff the way that I would imagine he would have been. So again, time to move on, get younger.
All right. Last 4 here. The edge rusher, Justin Hollins, Jamie?
Yeah, I think you probably keep him. He has some juice off the edge, can probably contribute on special teams. No telling how Harbaugh is going to view Rumph coming into this offseason. And you're probably looking at being without at least Khalil Mack, if not both Mack and Bosa. So you need some bodies. And I think Hollins showed that he can get to the quarterback or at least affect the quarterback. Last year, he's had a couple 3-sack seasons in the past. Seems like a good edge 3 or edge 4.
Greg?
Yep, another developmental guy. I think that you can keep him in the room and help him to come in and contribute. If you want to do it on special teams, hopefully you don't necessarily have to get him on the field, especially not too early. But there's some stuff that can be worked with there. He's got some tools. And again, I think this new regime is going to be all about development. So I wouldn't be surprised if you see a little bit of something from him this year. So I'd be good with bringing him back.
Yeah, I'm okay either way. I kind of like some of the potential of some of these younger guys like Andrew Farmer and Ty Shelby as some training camp competition. I could see throwing Justin Hollins in that group and just letting them battle it out in camp. I'm fine with it. All right, so here we go. Cornerback, Sang Bassi, Jamie.
Yeah, I said earlier I would keep him. I think I'm looking at him as a corner 3, corner 4 kind of a thing. He played some inside. He played some outside last year. He can contribute on special teams. He's going to come cheap. You don't need to give him more than 1 year. I think you're looking at 1 year, $1.5 million ish, 1.75 million, somewhere in there. They need bodies, and he played reasonably well. I think he exceeded expectations, certainly last year when he was on the field. And I would rather bring him back and try to see what they can pull out of him than bring back Michael Davis.
Yeah, I would say bring him back as well. Aside from just needing the bodies, I think that in the action he saw last year, I think he got in about like 7 or so games, but really scrappy in the slot. I like that about him. I don't necessarily want him on the outside per se because he's a smaller body. I don't think he'd fare well long-term there for an extended period of time, should I say. So more of a slot corner, super high effort, good short area quickness. So yeah, absolutely. Again, he's more than a warm body, so that's great. And if you can get anything out of him, that's a plus as well.
So obviously I'm bringing back Michael Davis in my scenario. So I don't think I'm bringing back Bassi. I think I will give him credit. He did improve throughout the year, but at the beginning when he was the starter, he was absolutely awful. He was by far the worst corner on the field, but eventually he worked into his role. And he was okay. I think he found a home in the slot, but I don't know about giving him a CB3 role in my mind. I think he's more 4 at best, if not 5. But just
wouldn't it be a third stint with the Chargers also?
Who? Bassi?
Bassi.
I know it's with the Broncos. Is it his third?
I think it is. I think this would be his third time around. Twice in the Staley era. They brought him in, cut him, and then he came back. Yeah.
All right. Last 2. Tanner Muse. Craig?
I'm keeping Muse. If for nothing else, special teams. Hyper athletic guy. Probably one of those core special teams cats that can really contribute in that phase of the game. And those guys are invaluable when you're talking about how important the special teams are and how the Chargers have put an emphasis on it. I think he can be one of the stars in that role. Not sure if he develops into anything more than that, but some guys are just career special teamers. And I think that's a role that he's carved out for himself. If he ever sees the field in any capacity and performs, again, lanyap. But as far as my expectations for him go, I think he's a core special teams guy. And if you have a high performer in that phase of the game, I think you hold on to him.
Did he play much last year? I feel like he came here and got hurt right away.
I don't think he played a ton, but
I think he was supposed to be like a big special team.
Well, yeah, it was with Pittsburgh. He was with the Steelers, and I think I'm crossing it up. So yeah, he was a high performer with the Steelers, and they brought him over to be a special teams contributor with the Chargers. I don't think he played a ton, but that's what I would want to keep him around for the special teams ability.
And did you say lanyap?
I did. I'm from Louisiana, dude.
Damn, man. God, I just caught it.
Yeah. Sorry.
Nice. Sorry. A little occasion. I like it. A little occasion on the podcast. Jamie?
I can take it or leave it. If you want to bring him back, cool. If not, I'm fine with that too. I don't have a real strong feeling about it either way.
Yeah. I don't care either way. But I do like Andrew Farmer and Ty Shelby again. Just throwing that out there in the edge group. Last one, Cameron Tom.
Who?
Yeah, I don't.
Yeah, there's no need to bring him back. You got to get a look at Hymas and McFadden in camp, and like I said, you got to believe they're going to come out of the first 3 rounds with a potential starting center. So, I think Cameron's looking for a job.
Yeah, no, I'm not bringing him back at all. Is this the wrong? And who's that one tackle that came out of college a couple years ago? Something Tom?
Zach Tom?
Zach Tom.
Zach Tom.
Zach Tom.
Zach
They
Tom.
got the wrong Tom. All right.
Was that Stanley's guy?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was Stanley's crush.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yep.
Hey, he won't let you forget it either. He still talks about Zach Tom.
I think he's playing well, though.
He is. He definitely is. All right, cool. We're good here. Covering all the internal free agents. Not keeping a lot, as you can tell. So we're going to go over free agents next week. Little schedule change. On Thursday in 2 days, we're doing defensive free agents and offensive free agents, which are external free agents from other teams. So we'll talk about some of our favorites on the offensive side and the defensive side that could help the Chargers going into 2024. I am at Garrett, Jamie at Lightning_round, Craig at top_flight FLYT3, and we will see you next time.
Thanks, everybody.
Salute.